So chapter 6 is all about the things in the physical environment that influence customer and consumer behavior. We're going to look at the exterior and the interior design, sound, and then of course that retail atmospherics. So if we start with exterior design, then there's two things in particular that show up on the syllabus. There's landscaping and window displays. So we know that landscaping and generally exterior features like this are more important for small independent shops. Big brand name stores like your Walmarts and your Targets can use their brand name and their already known customer base to draw people in. But particularly if you're a smaller, more independent store, you need to think about these things. So research has shown that vegetation can positively influence the mood, particularly of urban respondents, that plants and flowers in malls can positively affect the perception of the environment, the quality of the products, that landscaping can have all of these desired effects. Window displays too. We've previous research to the example study found that sales can be higher for stores with windows and without, and then of course that those windows displays should be aesthetically pleasing. The way that this is studied in particular is through the example study of mower. So if you take a look at mower, the goal was to look at the effect of window displays and landscaping on customer responses. Specifically, they looked at the DVs of liking, mood, including those affective responses, and patronage intentions. We say patronage intentions because this wasn't done based in actual stores on sales, but it was an online survey, 180 mostly female American university students. So we already know maybe there's some issues with the generalizability there. And they were told to imagine they needed to buy a new pair of jeans. Then they logged onto a website and read a description of the exterior of a small clothes shop. Some of the exteriors included window displays and or landscaping. So our results are pretty straightforward. Both window displays and landscaping positively influence participants' liking as well as their patronage intentions. Now, if you look at the abstract here, they also delved a little bit into that, the pad model, which we're going to talk about, which comes up a lot in this particular chapter. But notice that the results found that window displays and landscaping had no main effect on pleasure or arousal. So there was no mediating factor of pad when it came to this, but they did have an influence on respondents' liking and patronage intentions. Now, it seemed that the liking influenced the mood, which influenced the patronage intentions. So when we get in particular to our studies on scent, keep that in mind. But most importantly, we know that they have positive effects on liking and patronage intentions, and that liking might have influenced mood. I would take a look at this. This is screenshotted from the study itself, some specific suggestions that mower makes as a result of the findings. Now, the next bit is about internal. So we talked about an external effect. Now we're going to look at an internal or an interior design effect, and that has to do with the layout. So there's three layouts you should be aware of. You've got the grid layout, rectangular, long aisles running parallel. This is known for the clear and distinct traffic aisles that it creates, efficient use of that selling space, lots more space for display because you're obviously using both sides of each aisle. You also have your freeform layout. In this case, the aisles, the aisles, I put in kind of air quotes, the displays are kind of free flowing. It's asymmetric. It's focused on different styles and shapes of displays. The effect of this is often, it's designed to increase the amount of time you spend there because it encourages you to browse rather than go directly to the thing you're looking for, the way that the aisles often do. And then you have your racetrack. And the goal of the racetrack is to make this kind of interesting, unusual, more entertaining shopping experience because customers are forced to follow this path and visit as many sections as possible. So what Virchopolis set out to do was to investigate the effect of layout, but specifically in an online setting. So to look at whether the general rules we know about the effects of different layouts in brick and mortar stores or real world stores, whether that would apply to online layouts. So obviously the first thing you had to do is convert these websites to have them reflect these various layouts. We're talking about 120Ps. He recruited them from Greece, the United Kingdom. This is a lab experiment, created a fake website. All of them were given 20 pounds. They were given a blank shopping list, told to pre-plan their purchases. And then each participant was assigned to one of 3 online store layouts. And they did actually, the researchers did actually purchase the items that they had ordered. You should be aware of the IV, the manipulated variables, the layout, of course. Then they collected data about 4 different DVs. So was it perceived as useful for planned purchases? Was it perceived as easy to use? Was it entertaining? And how long did the piece spend there? The time obviously was the only one that was gathered by objective data. How long did they spend on the website? The others were, the data was gathered via self-report. So these are some of the items that were used to assess those 3, just so you can kind of see. And then here's how the layouts were converted from a brick and mortar store to an online version of it. So for Freeform, we'll start with Racetrack actually. For Racetrack, they had to go from one kind of section to the other, and the only way to get there was to go forward through it or backward through it. With Grid, we have that kind of hierarchical. There were categories, then subcategories, and then with Freeform, it was mostly just a search button or selecting an item as it was displayed on the page. So the way to remember it kind of is to think about what was hypothesized based on real world shopping and what the actual result was. So based on real world research in a real world shopping, customers generally find the grid to be most useful for planned purchases. And I think about your grocery store. When we go into a grocery store, we have a grocery list and the grid makes it easy because we can be like, okay, need that aisle, don't need that aisle. And we can move kind of efficiently through it. Well, interestingly, in Virtuopolis's online version, Freeform was found to be more useful, which kind of makes sense because you could just search for the item you needed. In the real world, generally consumers find Freeform to be the easiest to use. You can just kind of wander. But in the Virtuopolis results, they found Grid to be the easiest to use, if not for planned purchases. Those are some, just memorize a couple of them. It's a pain, but there's your kind of results. Your conclusion is easier to remember. Your conclusion, conventional wisdom does not help us. Conventional wisdom, what we find from real life research does not apply to online grocery shopping. Now, when we go into our 6.2, and this one we're talking about sound and consumer behavior, they looked at music through a key study, which I have a different video on, but background noise was the other part of 6.2. So we know some stuff from previous research. So there's an example study, of course, here, the Woods example study. We already knew some stuff from previous research, but it was a little bit contradictory. So when we looked at, when Woods designed their study, they said, okay, we're going to use non-food related sounds because some previous research had amplified the crunch sound and played it into people's headphones. So they're using non-food related sounds. You may remember Woods used white noise. Some other previous studies had the issue where they weren't wearing headphones in the no sound condition. So headphones no matter what. And they were rating measures that had no sound component. So we're not rating it on crunchiness. We're rating it in experiment 1 for Woods anyway. We're rating it on salty or sweet. And then we did test both crunchy and soft foods. So 48 college students, each one did 25 trials. So obviously this is repeated measures. There were 2 IVs. One of the IVs was obviously the sound that was played. They tasted each stimulus, in loud white noise, quiet white noise, and no noise. The other IV was the hardness. Remember, they used both crunchy and soft foods, and they rated in each trial for 3 dependent variables: the saltiness, the sweetness, and the liking. This kind of gives you a visual of how each trial, or how the experimental setup was. So there are 5 different stimuli foods. You can see 2 salty, 2 sweet, and then a dummy stimulus that was used that was neither sweet nor salty. You can take a look and read the procedure just so you can be reminded if you want. I would point out that the sound condition was blocked. So I would do all of my tastings in the loud white noise condition, then all of my tastings in the quiet white noise condition, then all of my tastings in the no noise condition. And then that was counterbalanced across participants. So some Ps would do it in that order. Some Ps would do it in a different order. But then within each block, the trial of the 5 stimuli, that was also randomized. If we look at the results, most significantly, we can see that in the loud white noise condition, that dark gray, foods were rated less sweet and less salty in the loud white noise condition compared to the quiet one. We also have here the baseline, because remember they would tasted it in no noise, quiet, and loud. But we're going to compare loud white noise to quiet white noise. And in both the cases of the sweetness and saltiness, it was rated as less sweet and less salty in loud compared to quiet or baseline. Now, the study tells us that descriptively, food was rated higher for liking, that the participants liked the food more in the quiet white noise condition compared to the loud white noise condition. But as you can see from these bars, the difference was not significant. ACE wants you to be aware of some possible explanations for the way that background noise seems to affect a completely unrelated thing like our sense of taste. The one that this offers the most evidence for, this Wood study, is either an attentional, the idea that the presence of that noise is distracting from my ability to perceive that taste, or perhaps a cross-modal contrast, because the noise sounds loud. Because the noise sounds loud to me, the food tastes less flavorful in contrast. Not that it is distracting from my ability to perceive the food, but I'm just like, wow, the noise is loud and the food is less intense in its taste in contrast. Which brings us, of course, to our 6.3 on retail atmospherics. So you need to know what the PAD model is, and inexplicably, one year they were like, write a whole paragraph on the PAD model, almost divorced from consumer psych at all. So the PAD model is this psychological model that was created and is often used in multiple studies, is often used to describe people's emotional states. So there's three dimensions. That's the word I was trying to think of. There's three dimensions here. One of them is pleasure versus displeasure. So we have this range of items that can be used to assess the extent to which whatever the input is producing pleasure or displeasure in a participant. Different from that is the dimension of arousal. Because as you can imagine, there are positive types of arousal, but there's also negative types of arousal. If anyone has ever been overstimulated, you know that would be a negative. That would be a type of arousal that would still code as negative when it comes to pleasure. Then finally, you have your dominance as a dimension, which is not one we really associate much with consumer research. But generally, when we go to apply that to consumer research, we have, well, if the input, whatever it is producing pleasure and it's producing arousal, then it's going to lead to positive approach behaviors from consumers. Obviously, the opposite of pleasure, we have displeasure, dissatisfaction, or boredom is the other end of the spectrum on arousal. That's going to produce avoidance behaviors. So one of those things we can look at is the different things that affect ambiance. And ambiance is the atmosphere. The one we're going to look at first is odor. So we have a lot of research research previous to this Shabbat and Michonne study about how odor might affect customers. But Shabbat and Michonne said, okay, well, which of the models explains how scent affects shoppers? Because we know that scent affects shoppers, but Shabbat and Michonne said, let's look at what exactly is happening. How is it happening? Are we seeing Moravian and Russell's PAD model? Are we seeing that scent is directly affecting the mood, the pleasure, the arousal, and that is affecting the consumer behavior? Or would Lazarus's cognitive theory of emotions better explain it? Do we see a situation where the scent that's being pumped in affects people's thoughts? That's the cognitive part. Their positive perception or negative could be of the environment and the products. And then that cognitive aspect then cues or affects the emotions, and that affects the behavior. So Shabbat and Michonne said, well, which one is it? Is it the emotion cognition model, or is it the cognitive theory of emotions? This connects back all the way to that mower that we were talking about. Window display and landscaping had no main effect on pleasure or arousal. The effect was on liking. So in the mower study, we found the cognitive theory of emotions to be more the determining factor. But it could be different for scent. So Shabbat and Michonne set out to see which one it was. Here we see that Moravian's PAD model, the emotion cognition model. Then we see Lazarus's cognitive theory of emotion. So is the ambient scent first affecting cognitive thought perceptions of the mall and the products, and then that affects mood and leads to behavior? Their methodology, you remember they pumped a light citrus scent into the main mall corridor for 1 week, and then there was nothing pumped in during the control week. This was significant in that it's the first odor study conducted in a real mall. They did make some efforts to control for things like sales. They made sure that all the special promos were canceled during the 2 weeks of the experiment. The data was collected by graduate students who were specifically instructed not to wear perfume or anything that might influence or impact people's responses. So in the questionnaire, they asked them about perceptions of product quality, the shopping environment, pleasure, and arousal, as well as spending. They chose citrus because it was, previous research suggested it would be a good choice. As far as our sample, we're obviously talking about an opportunity sample. It was slightly more women than men, but it was representative of the larger population in Quebec. There were 447 individuals in the control group and 145 subjects that were in the scent group. The results they found, odor does seem to increase arousal, but it doesn't necessarily increase pleasure. Odor does seem to directly influence perceptions. We have a main effect of odor on perceptions, the cognition of the shopping environment, the product quality. We do find that spending does seem to be mediated primarily by those perceptions, that the cognitive theory of emotions, this offers the most evidence for the cognitive theory of emotions, not for the emotion cognition theory. Now, the other part of ambiance that the syllabus asks us to look at is the effects of crowding. It's worth remembering the difference between crowding and density. Crowding is a subjective feeling. I cannot manipulate crowding. I can manipulate the density of objects in the room. I can put more items in the room in hopes of making you feel crowded, but I cannot manipulate crowding directly. I can only manipulate density. There's two types of crowding. You've got human crowding, so the amount of individuals and the amount of social interaction being required of you, and then spatial crowding. So again, we're looking at, we know previous research tells us that crowding does affect shopper satisfaction, but are there any mediating factors that are going to influence how crowding affects our shopper satisfaction? So Mockley looked at that. Specifically, he looked at certain other factors like how much is crowding affecting your emotions, and those emotions are affecting your satisfaction. Or what about people's individual tolerance or their expectations for crowding? In other words, what is it that's affecting it? So Mockley's methodology, there were 3 different studies. 2 of them were field experiments with questionnaires just about your most recent shopping experience. And one of them was an actual lab experiment where the density was manipulated. He created videos of a bookstore manipulating the human and object crowding. The first sample was undergraduate and graduate students at American universities. The second sample was a questionnaire sent to adults. I think they were recruited from like a parenting group, a suburban parenting and social group at a couple of different daycare facilities and a private elementary school. But again, they were just asked to take the questionnaire home and then after a shopping experience to answer those questions. When we look at their results, the effect is complex. It's not really. We know that crowding is negatively correlated with satisfaction. We know that the more crowded it is, the less satisfied people will be. And we know that's true of both human and spatial crowding. But they found that spatial crowding was more significantly correlated. And we can understand that in terms of like, store owners can't control the number of people that come in. Well, I mean, they can, but store owners generally don't control or want to stop the number of people that come in. But if you have spatial crowding, if you have objects placed in a crappy way that makes it hard to get around, that's more likely to be interpreted as being the store owner's fault. When they looked at mediating factors, they found that crowding obviously decreases positive feelings and increases negative feelings, and that partially explains the effect on satisfaction. But even when you remove that, that doesn't fully explain it. So there's some other mediating factors that are influencing the way that you react to crowding. And what Machlit found was that includes things like your expectations and your individual tolerance. Here's some direct quotes. Speaking of individual tolerance, among those with a low level of tolerance, both human and spatial crowding are going to be negatively correlated with satisfaction. But for those people who had a high tolerance for crowding, only the spatial crowding was negatively correlated with satisfaction. So if you have a high tolerance for crowding, then lots of humans in your space doesn't bother you. Another thing, expectations. Obviously, shoppers are most satisfied when their expectations are met, or if there's less crowding than expected. So if you, for example, are going shopping on Black Friday, you are expecting there to be crowding. So that can be a mediating factor that influences the extent to which the crowding affects your satisfaction. Type of store, too, can be a mediating factor. Places where shoppers are going to gauge the value by the number of shoppers. So a place like a discount store, human crowding may not be related to satisfaction because you see that there's a lot of people there and you're like, oh, actually, this is a good sign. This is a sign of value. So there may not be a relationship to satisfaction. Now, at no point were they like, yes, the more crowds, the better. You still have some kind of influence of crowding on satisfaction. But for other types of stores, places where you don't necessarily expect to find, I shouldn't say expect, places that the number of shoppers doesn't indicate anything in particular, then you're going to find that crowding, both types of crowding, are significantly negatively correlated with shopper satisfaction. The more human crowding you perceive, the more spatial crowding you perceive, the lower your satisfaction is.